is Tiffany of Tiffany Cosplay. I am a full-time costume and prop fabricator as well as educator on YouTube. I do live crafting streams there, so if you ever want to see me making my stuff in person, go to YouTube. As well as tutorials. So tutorial for the belt, tutorial for how I made the bodysuit, designing it, hand sewing it, and everything in between. Tutorial coming soon for this thing. I'll be in Gigs tomorrow. A tutorial for the Ashbringer, which and these. Pretty much everything up here is foam. Some parts have a little bit of 3D printing and modeling. Some have installation foam. Just depends on what it is. But for foam, we are in advanced foam smithing, so I'm going to kind of skip a little bit of the basics, but you can still apply this if you are new as well. I do have actually a panel from EKCon on the basics of EVA foam, so feel free to go to YouTube and watch that if you want to see the lab version. So EVA foam, at this point, if you've been working with foam, you may or may not have realized there's different types of foam. There's cheap kinds and more expensive kinds. For getting into more like better quality builds and for things to last longer, I highly recommend not going to Hobby Lobby and getting your foam there. And going to more SKS Props or TNT Cosplay Supply, which actually is local here in Dallas. And the foam quality is just so much better, so much better. So if you have the money to do that, I recommend that. You still can get good quality work with the Hobby Lobby and cheap foam, but you're going to get better results going to that type of foam. There's also more high density foam, which is a thicker type of foam, and it's just going to look better in the end. With working with foam, when you're starting to go into more of a master's quality level, you want to start working in different thicknesses. And when I say thicknesses, I mean like you're not working in just 2mm or 10mm. You're using a combination of like this one. So this is 2mm, 4mm, 10mm, and then sandwiched in between 2 12mm. So all of that, so you get so many different levels. Because in reality, when making armor, not everything is going to be the same thickness. And also with sanding, if you're having to sand a 12mm thickness of foam to make it a lot smaller, you might as well just buy the smaller foam. My favorite is 4mm. That's like my go-to. Just about everything is made out of that. And then for smaller details, it's the 2mm. And then for larger, thicker ones, I'll stack with either 10 or 12, depending on what I can get. Save money by buying in bulk for foam because you don't want seams. And how to not have seams is to get larger pieces of foam, because then if you're making a breastplate, let's say, so not the breast area, but the under part, if you can have one piece of foam that wraps all the way around the body, you only have the one seam in the back that's either going to be a zipper or Velcro. Where if you're going to have to do multiple ones because you don't have enough foam to go around, you then have to hide each of those seams, which involves sanding or putting some type of decorative piece on there. If you're doing like a line to cover it, that's fine, but for doing more advanced level work, especially for competitions, you don't want to see seams. You want to hide them as much as possible. But for getting rid of seams, you want to sand them and have some stuff. So you can sand by hand, which if you've sanded by hand ever, is a pain. This is a large, it's one of those paint mixing bucket sticks, sanding stick. So you just get your grit of sandpaper and tape it on. Sandpaper, if you don't know, there's different grits. So 120 would be a more rough grit, where if you go to a higher number, it's a less rough grit. Always confuse me, but so you want to work from like a 120 if you have really bad seams, or even use a box cutter and cut away if your seam is not flush and it's like that. Just get rid of that and then sand it. But from 120, and then I I think this is 220, and sometimes I'll go lower, but I have stuff in between. This is also a tiny little standing stick, which, so for this, the butt part, this is all foam, and it's all, so there's one piece that goes here, small little section, about that thick. Then there's another piece that goes here, and another one, and another one. But to get rid of those seams as much as possible, first started with a 120, working my way down. If you're doing it by hand, the grit is going to make your foam fluffy. You don't want fluffy foam for the most part. So going down to the other ones will make it smoother, as well as heat treating as you go onto the seams. And I will pass these out. Also, upgrading your tooling really helps if you can afford getting a Dremel, or specifically a flex shaft, which is basically, you'll have like a motor thing up here, it hangs, and then has wire that comes down to your handpiece, and that gives you the best control when you can control it with a foot pedal too, rather than your Dremel that has an on and off and not really very good control on your speed. For me, I was basically a jewelry designer working in gold and silver, and so I use that machine, but they do have a lot more affordable ones that are cheaper now. Just go on Amazon. I highly recommend those over just the hand piece or hand ones of Dremel, but they still work just as fine. And using sanding drums. So this is a 2-inch sanding drum, and this is my best friend. They do not sell it at Home Depot, but you can find the smaller ones, which is, and I'll pass this around in a second. The smaller two you can get at Home Depot or Lowe's. This one, you go to my Amazon page, amazon.com/Tiffany Cosplay, I think it is. I have a link to this actually. It's not technically a sanding drum, it's for like, I don't know what the machine is, but it's part of a kit, and this is the smallest one. And the shaft is the only part that fits from that kit into a Dremel. All the other ones are too large, but it's basically, I think it's like a sanding piston or something. You put it there, and then it just rotates into a machine, but it fits in your Dremel. So recommend that, because that, you're having to sand a wall thickness that thick with a piece that's that tiny is not going to work. So if you have a much larger one, you're going to get that a lot quicker and a lot finer. So I highly recommend that. Also with foam, so working with it, I kind of work back and forth between, like over the years, if I heat treat it before or after I'm finished. And I find that the best result is actually to heat treat your foam before you even work on it. So if you have your sheet of foam, heat treat the whole thing. Reason being, when you glue your pieces together and then you heat treat, your foam actually shrinks slightly, and contact cement glue reactivates with heat. Oh. So all your seams now are no longer nice and pretty. So typically what I'll do is I do a very light heat treat afterwards, and that's only to the parts that I sanded. So if all of your foam is already pre-heat treated, you don't really have to worry about it too much, and you're less likely to have even more cleanup after you cleaned up, and it just is a hassle then. And should know about heat treating your foam already for advanced level, but if you don't know, basically your foam, especially when you get to better quality foam, you're going to notice such a big difference with heat treating. Heat treating, basically, your foam is very porous. When you heat treat it with a heat gun, it's going to close all that, and it's going to make it a lot flatter, smoother. You're going to get better edges that are going to be more flush together, and you'll get a much nicer paint job. Good job. Cool. Okay. Other stuff. So one of the tools that I use quite a bit has a bunch of different names. You have a hot knife, a hot wire, a hot wand, a wood burner. They're basically all kind of the same thing, but they're different types of tips. So, and you can use them to make tons and tons of texture into your foam, especially if you're trying to get like Monster Hunter grimy like decay on your foam. That's like the best thing. But you have your hot wand, which you work in insulation foam. That's your best friend. It cuts so simple, that, and then your hot wire too. Hot wire more for texture with foam. You don't really want to cut it too much with it just because it is going to burn it, and you'll kind of, it's less likely to keep this straight up and down. So this actually attaches to a stick that heats up. But if you have, they have like the permanent place ones that you can get, just a little bit more pricey, and I don't really recommend them. But I also have in this one other types of tips. And so basically your hot ones are going to give you more straight lines, where your wood burner, which are really fun because wood burners, if you haven't used one before, they have so many different types of texture tips. They're not typically just like a straight one. They normally will have like a diamond shape that has like a bunch of little shapes in the inside and things like that, and you can get much better like textures into your foam with it. With burning any type of foam, which are these tools, you will want to wear a respirator because you don't want to breathe in all of the smoke and everything from the fumes. Texture-wise, upgrading again to a Dremel or a flex shaft gives you so many opportunities of different bits that you can put into them. So with using the sanding drums, you can make rivets by just straight up and down, and then it creates a perfect little circle that can create your little rivets everywhere. You can also do a diamond cutter or a disc cutter kind of thing, small little discs that are about like that, and then they just rotate and you can just make slash marks with that. So a lot of armor, so these here, so they're painted in more, so they pop for camera, but these are actually used with it, so they're dashed into it pretty well. For seams, if you have any like cracks and seams for fixing it, you can use quick seal. You can also use it as a texture, which is really fun. If you've seen my Moon Man costume, or I'm sorry, my Emil costume, same thing, both circled head critters. I like to make weird head critters if you haven't seen my work, so go check out my website and everything. But quick seal, you file over to the surface of your foam. Really cool technique in texture afterwards. You just have to wait 24 hours for it to dry. But that is really good for fixing your seams. Only downfall is, as you see, you can see it. And it dries a different shine than the foam. So you want to use for your seams the least amount as possible. The more quick seal you use, if it's showing on the edges, so if you see the white, if you're going to paint over it or use Classy Dip, it's going to be a different shine. And your foam is more of a matte finish. Even if you use a sealer on top of your paint jobs, you're still going to have a different feel to it. Have a tiny bit more of a shine for the quick seal. So only on your seams. And how you work with that is you just apply on the seam and then do only probably about like, let's say 4 inches at a time, because at that point it's going to dry faster than you can work with it. And then with a paper towel and a little bit of water, I normally will rip about like squares like that big and just wipe off. And anything that is on the foam that's not in the seam should start coming off, and then just leave it into the seam and it will dry that way and you're good. Other ways to fix your cracks and seams would be foam clay. And with that, it's kind of the same thing on where you only want to apply it into the crack and seam, and then same thing of water, and then this time you're going to use your finger and wipe back and forth, so it's only in that section. Pluses and downsides on both of them would be foam clay is going to dry a more closer, consistent shine of your normal EVA foam, where quick seal, you're going to see it a lot more. Quick seal is bendable, so it's better for, if you're going to do anything that bends, then it's going to hold up. Where if you do foam clay into a section that bends like here, it's going to crack there. So you kind of have to be aware of which one you want to use in which circumstance. Going on to Classy Dip, at this point, you can use Mod Podge. It's okay, in my opinion, but honestly, I like Classy Dip. That's my go-to. I might be biased about it, but everybody has their own favorites. And for me, it's plasti dip. You have to wear a respirator. It has to be outside. It's a rubber spray paint, basically. And for this, the reason I use it over other different mediums is it actually will help hold your foam together better. And it makes it where, so this piece, it was flat when I painted it. Because it's plasti dip, I can actually heat it up and bend it after it is completely done.
Oh.
So plasti dip kind of lets you do that. The only downfall is that trick only works if you airbrush paint, not if you hand paint. If you hand paint, your paint cracks. So that's goods and bads. All I'm going to do now is airbrush painting, and that's just because the quality that you can get with an airbrush gun is so much better than your hand. Your hand, like, it depends on your costume, but painting by hand will really, like, the whole thing. You'll get brush strokes, and if it's not intentional, you can see that. The reflection of light onto the surface of EVA foam, if you have brush strokes from heavy paint, is really noticeable. So for here, if I was to rotate this way and I had a giant painted brush stroke, you're going to see that. So if it's not intentional, I do though go back after I airbrush paint and I paint by hand, but with airbrush paint, just because it's the same type of paint. You don't really want to mix too much going back and forth. I know everybody says use oil paint. From an art major background, I cannot recommend that. Oil paint does not dry fast at all. Normally it takes you a month for it to dry. It may be a fast kind of way for you to make nice pretty dirt. Don't do it. I've seen it ruin so many costumes. Easy way to do, especially if you're airbrush painting, work in small sections. That's how this is. So basically, this whole thing is done. Black airbrush paint. While small section, while it's still wet, paper towel. Wherever paper towel doesn't touch, it's going to leave a shadow into that section. It's also then going to go into all of your dents into your foam. So if you have intentional, like armored, detailed dents, I'm trying to see what I have in things. So like for the sword, for here, same thing. It stays in that spot, nice and pretty. I typically like to work and make my props for the camera. So I tend to do a lot more black edging on everything, just because of social media and everything. It pops so much more. And in person from a distance, you're really gonna notice that. Up close, you're gonna see more black lines, but it's gonna look really good from a distance. The only downfall is it looks more flat occasionally. It depends on the character design. So like World of Warcraft, I definitely went for more of like the skin straight out of the game rather than making some parts three-dimensional. Where if you were to airbrush paint it all nice in there, so like this one's kind of more where more parts are shaded, it does tend to slightly muddy your piece a little bit. Also, sealing your pieces. It's a really, really big thing. I learned about this through a couple of competitions of, hey, your piece is really shiny and it's supposed to be matte. Wood is not super, super shiny. It's like that. And that was like back in the day. Different ways that you can seal your piece. So why seal your piece? For one, it's going to make your paint last longer, and it's also going to change your piece entirely. So your piece can look really dull, especially if you're doing different types of paint. So if you are mixing between acrylics to oils to water-based things in between, they all dry a different shine. And by making it all even or look like if you're trying to make wood out of foam and trying to paint it realistically, you probably don't want it to be shiny. And some paints, depending on what brand you're using, are going to be shiny. So this kind of helps. What I used to use was Rust-Oleum Clear Enamel Spray Paint. It comes in gloss, semi-gloss, matte, and I think there's like one more. But that's what I used to use. It worked really well. But then I found other options. The reason going away from it is if you're using a spray paint can, you get a little less control of how much comes out of it, especially that first spray. The initial oh, there's leftover blobs. And if it's too heavy of a spray, it actually will go and kind of fall down your piece, and then you'll get these nasty lines. Now, I am sponsored by them, but I'm not sponsored to say anything nice about them, so that's my thing. But Cretex Colors, they are an airbrush paint company, and they have a sealer. It's their UV-less sealer, and it comes in matte, satin, and gloss. I got samples to show you, and you can see the difference that it does on all of your foam. As well as, this is the same color. So with painting, especially with airbrush painting on foam, you gotta paint with a base color. And that base color, whether it's white or black, will make a huge difference. And the color on these are Wicked Pearl White. So that's a shiny white, basically. Same with, so here's your gold with a black base and a white base. So it really changes, and it'll definitely change your painting game on all of your foam pieces. So, forgot to show you this. So with cutting circles, don't ever cut a circle. Don't do it by hand. It doesn't work. That's from Costco circle cutter. So this is their medium size. Basically, has 3 different sizes that attach in here, and it's got a little gray protector, so don't cut yourself when I pass this around, please. It has one smaller. This is their medium one, and then they have a 1-inch one. Those are perfect, so you don't have to use your googly eyes. If you feel like your googly eyes, that's fine, but let's be real. I can tell it's plastic under there. It's not foam. And it's cool if you want to hear the sound all day, but if you've got googly eyes up here constantly, headache. But Costco's hole drill, they also have a circle cutter that goes up to, I believe, 6 or 8 inches. It's a giant circle with a handle. And it goes through, I believe, like 20 millimeter. Those are my go-tos for circles. They do carve your foam though. So you will have a very nasty edge that you have to sand. Not with these, but with the circle cutter. But I highly recommend investing in those. Just personal circles, I don't ever cut a circle. So. Plasti dip also, so if you have not used it, it comes in a wide variety of colors. My preference is actually the gray one because, again, with airbrush painting, depending on the base color you want it white, you want it black. Gray is a very good in between, where if your plasti dip is white and you have to go all the way to the other side of the spectrum, that creates a lot more paint. Same with black all the way to the other side. Then when painting, so you may, if you've done any masking for painting onto foam, you may have discovered tape residue left on your foam pieces. And the way to avoid that is not to tape unpainted areas. So for instance, this piece. So this one, for painting, it's all plasti dips. Let's say it's gray. Then I would paint one color first. So we're gonna say gray. I'm gonna paint this color gray. I'm not gonna care that my paint is going to these other sections. Once that paint is done, I've already done my shadowing, I've done any highlights, not any detail painting, just a basic airbrush painting. After that, I'm only going to tape that section. And for doing that, don't get painter's tape. It doesn't work, it's crap. You want to invest in the more, unfortunately, expensive tape, and I prefer the, I think it's the Scotch tape, masking tape. And when using that, especially in Texas, it may be different if you're up north, but I paint in my garage. It's 100. You need good quality tape that's not going to peel up. But that tape is it's good, but it's almost too good. So to help with that, get your tape, put it on your leg, peel it off, put it on your piece. It never peels off the paint, ever. Never had it happen. That is if you properly do your heat treating, your 3 coats plasti dip, and you're not putting it directly to the plasti dip, you're only putting it to painted areas. So we have the gray now painted, it's now masked off, and then I can go and paint the blue sections. And then from that, once that's done, mask that off. You don't need to remove the gray. You can leave that there. You can also use paper. If you have old sketchbooks, I'm going through sketchbooks from like middle school and high school, like 15 years ago. And you can use that instead and just have the tape around the seam. And that's good. And then you're not having to use tons of it. But doing that section, and then you can do the gold and you don't need to mask it afterwards. Once you're done painting, you can remove all the masking tape, and at that point, I do my detail painting with the same type of paint. So for that is airbrush paint by hand with a paintbrush going around any other details with masking off. Sometimes if your tape is not properly there, attached, or if you have a, your tape, you have a little bit of a seam, it's nice to kind of clean that up here and there. But at that point, then I would seal the piece all at once. And if different parts need to be a different type of shine, for me, I hand paint all of my sealer. For this specific sample, you can technically use that brand for airbrush gun, but I want to do it inside and not outside, reasons heat, and it's a lot easier. But then you can just kind of paint, like if I wanted this to be shiny, I could just paint all of this matte with the sealer, and then I could hand paint that part with the satin. And you can really tell the difference. We'll say with the sealers that Cretex has, they're satin and they're gloss. So their sealers are more, not for specifically EVA foam, so you doesn't really show too much of a difference between satin and gloss, but if you are painting with doing 2 3D prints and it's a very smooth surface, you can really tell the difference with the sealers. So that's my disclaimer on that. Heat treat.
What?
Heat treat.
Oh.
So for me, what I do for any of that is a little trick. Sew the nylon strapping to a 2mm EVA foam. So if your strap is, let's say here, make your foam a square that's like that far all the way around. So it's sewed to that, and then have it where when it attaches to your piece, the foam is on the outside, so it has the most surface area to go around, and you also have that protection of it being there. And using contact cement glue.
So you sandwich the nylon between the foam.
But you want to sew it to the foam.
Yeah, so you sew it, and then you sandwich that to the inside of the.
And that's gonna, so you're sewing it to the 2mm foam, and that's gonna ensure that your strap, because it's going to pull around something, doesn't pull out between the 2 sandwich pieces.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. That's excellent.
Another thing with foam, so I made this armor 3 years ago. It's lasted okay. I learned some things in the process. So I do a lot of my attachments with Velcro. Use Velcro that doesn't have adhesive on it. Adhesive doesn't work. Putting contact cement glue on your adhesive, it works once or twice, and then after that, especially in Texas, comes apart. So just avoid that. So it depends on the exact angle and if it's a piece this big or a piece this big. Will depend on, for me I use like my hand pieces to sand, the sanding drum. But you can also use like the sanding stick to go in between. Another little trick is when you have your corner like that, cut at a 45 with your X-Acto blade, and that will help for you to cut the opposite way. Other things would be, instead of having one piece like this, 2 separate pieces that you've already cut and then glued together.
Oh, okay.
So it just depends on the situation, but that tends to be my best results with that. It depends. So humidity stuff, painting in general, try not to paint in humidity or bring your piece inside to dry. It helps. Mixing your paint and actually shaking it beforehand does help too. Sometimes it just doesn't quite mix and it sticks for a lot longer. I don't have that problem too much anymore. I had it when I did Rust-Oleum enamel spray paint sealer, and that over time, the heat, like after pieces I made like 5 years start to stick. Warbler covered pieces, the moisture from the warbler now starts to come through. That's the only situations I've had it with there. So I would see on whatever sealer you're using, read it and make sure you're actually like shaking it all the way. If there's a little bead in it, shake it for like at least a minute, up and down, around and around. That's oh my god for that. Sorry. Are you heat treating after?
Probably not.
Okay, well that's actually like a good thing that you're not doing after. Depending on, so with contact cement glue, the proper way, I don't know if you're doing this or not, typically solves a lot of problems. It applies on both pieces, wait for both pieces to fully dry, and then attach them. Don't attach them while they're wet.
Oh, that would do it.
Yeah, if you're attaching them while they're wet, it's more likely to slip. And then also, so if you do like a slight cup with your hands, you notice that they don't touch in the very center. That's how your contact cement glue is going to be, and it can stay wet for up to a week and sometimes longer. So it may seem like it's dry all the way around, but it's not on the inside, and that's going to, especially when you sand, cause it to peel up. Heating it up, technically you have a slight little air bubble in there because it's not attached properly. So that would help solve it right away.
After the new.
It's okay. Infill is on the inside of your 3D printed. It's like the honeycomb thing. So you're not printing it solid. It makes it less heavy. For the stir step, so unless you're doing a resin printer, a normal 3D printer that's doing your plastics, it's printing, if you picture a stair step or like a staircase, it does the up, down. You're printing basically like that. So if you're going from, so this is technically, this one piece is 3D printed, not the rest of it. But if it's printing in layers upward, and it's going into smaller circles. And so you're gonna get what's called is stair stepping. And for that, you don't wanna see all the printing marks, you want them to go away. And what I do is, it'll depend on the piece, but a lot of times I will sand it lightly, helps to break it apart so it's not super rough. And then after that, sometimes I will use like the whole wall putty for, you know, moving and everything. Put it on there and then wait for it to dry. Sand it in not the direction. So if your stair steps are this way, don't sand it in that direction because you're more likely to sand it out of those grooves, sand it the opposite direction. And then that's going to basically leave all of it in there. You can also use Rust-Oleum sandable spray paint. And that same thing is sprayed on, wait for it to dry at least an hour in Texas weather heat, and then you can sand it, same thing, sand in the opposite direction, and then most likely you're going to want to do 1 to 2 coats of that after, and then you can start painting. You can also put plastic dip on 3D printed parts. And so for foam, you're doing foam and then a mixture of piping, 3D printed parts, different other things. It kind of gives you a more even, consistent look to your whole piece rather than a very mechanical piece, unless you need it for mechanical and for functioning. So, okay. But thank you guys so much for coming. I am so ready to take this off and shower. So yeah, but have a wonderful, wonderful Fan Expo, everybody. And I have business cards over there by Jesse and the camera. And if you'd like to see any of the other stuff up here,